Well, good morning. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. So thank you, Eve and SPEDNet, for sponsoring this, and to the New Canaan Library for letting us use this really beautiful space. So our discussion today is going to be based on the book, The Power of Validation, Arming Your Child Against Bullying, Peer Pressure, Addiction, Self-Harm, and Out-of-Control Emotions, and by Karyn Hall and Melissa Cook. Before I launch into our discussion today about what validation is, I just want to tell you a little bit more about me. You just got a little bit of my formal biography, but why I'm passionate about this topic. I'm a mother of 5 now adult children. My last one is in college. And so of course, with 5 kids, you're going to have a variety of personalities, interests, ways of expressing themselves. So I got a lot of on-the-job training on how to manage that. But my middle son, and he gave me his permission to share this, was diagnosed with dyslexia in 2nd grade. And I was not in special education or psychology. I was a software engineer, very different field at that time. And that was my first serious introduction into the world of special education. And so then I started in auditoriums like this, trying to become the most educated parent that I could on everything child development and reading disabilities, listened to everything from the Shaywitzes and all of their expertise. And in that process, I experienced some validation, but some invalidation about my experience as a parent. And I became more and more passionate about helping parents feel validated in their struggles of parenting kids, whether typical kids with different challenges, and helping children maintain a healthy self-esteem as they navigated and struggled some of these difficulties. So I first became acquainted with the topic of validation when I was doing some training on DBT, and I don't know if anyone is familiar with dialectical behavior therapy, but most of us know what validation is when we feel it, okay? We may not know what the name of it, the technical name and all the things we're going to talk about today. But in my practice, I often work with parents and sometimes parents and kids together, and I found myself talking a lot about validation, sort of going back to that baseline place and trying to provide that understanding on the fly when emotions are high can be, challenging. So I thought this would be a great idea to really talk about this and kind of give an understanding of validation. So goals for today. To understand what validation is and what it is not. I want you guys to feel validated as parents. Parenting is hard. And in the process, you reflect on your own history. As I shared before, I have a history that brings me here. And identify 1 or 2 behaviors or strategies that you would like to practice after you've learned about them today. So what is validation? It is conveying to the other, in this case our children, as we're going to talk about today, that we understand them. It's a way of offering acceptance. It's allowing your child to feel their feelings and allowing those feelings to be heard. It's actively seeking to understand your child's internal experiences and sincerely listening for the meaning behind your child's words and actions. And yes, it's easy in theory, much harder in practice. And so we're going to try to learn some strategies to do that today. What validation is not, and there's a lot of confusion about what validation is. Validation is not tolerating bad behavior. And I frequently hear that. How can I validate it? They just did something very naughty, very bad. Okay? It's not agreeing. It's not judging. It's not teaching, informing, correcting. I mean, those are necessary as parents, but that is not what we consider validating behavior. It's not the encouragement that we give or the cheerleading that we give. And that, again, we do a lot as parents, and it's important and necessary, but actually sometimes it can be invalidating, and we're going to talk about that. It's not running interference and helicoptering and running in and saving the day. And it's not giving undeserved compliments. Okay, some of these have a place, but these are not considered what we talk about as validating behaviors. And just to repeat, it is not tolerating bad behavior. Okay, we can validate things and still call out the bad behavior. So before we sort of launch into the nuts and bolts of all this, I want to be sure too that I acknowledge the uniqueness of everyone's situation. We all bring different families, different histories, different children to the table right here. And I'm sure you've left many presentations thinking, that's going to work for everybody else's family, but that's not going to work for mine. And I was there, I get that. My hope is that you can see in this presentation that there's ways to bring this into your family and know that not all problems are going to be solved overnight, but if we do the evaluation of ourselves and adjust to our children, that we can make that progress. So why do we validate? There's a lot of research out there, as I mentioned before. Marsha Linehan's DBT was where I first learned about validation. But we know from the research that validation improves relationships. And we know that relationships are significant contributors to our overall happiness. And relationships are central to human development. So relationship, relationship, relationship. Babies require validating interactions to grow and develop. You know, smiling at them when they do something, cheering them on when they try something new. Validation contributes to children's self-confidence and their sense of autonomy and their sense of self. Validation is helpful in managing strong emotions, teaching children how to do that. And children model what they are shown. And if we create better relationships with them, model validating them, then they in turn can create better relationships with their peers, with their siblings, and with us. Validation is, as I said, a central feature in dialectical behavior therapy. And Marsha Linehan first pioneered DBT through her personal experience and work with people with borderline personality disorder. But DBT is now expanded as a treatment for many mental health difficulties, and DBT skills are actually taught in school. So I bring that up because validation is a baseline part of DBT therapy. So that's the research, but how does this help me in my day-to-day parenting life? So validation improves the connection with your child. It increases the trust that they have in you. A child will not have to resort to showing us really big behaviors to show us how they feel, if we can validate how they're feeling right from the start. All of us are better able to emotionally regulate when we feel accepted and understood. And as I said in the beginning, we know what validation feels like when we experience it. And when kids feel validated, then they're more likely to engage in problem solving, when appropriate, because they know you understand their perspective. And think about it, if we are going to accept someone's guidance, advice, we're going to do it if we feel like they understand us. If we go into a doctor's office and we're telling the doctor about our symptoms and what we're experiencing, and they're looking down at their checkboard and they're just writing it down, at the end, they're going to give us some, recommendations. But if we don't think they understood our problem, they could be the best doctor in the world and everything they recommend could be great. But we're not going to feel that they really understood us, and we're going to be like, do I need to go get a second opinion? So we know when we feel understood and the difference that it makes in how we're able to navigate through things. Feeling validated helps a child feel okay and normal, okay? They build confidence in themselves, and they learn to trust their inner experience. And that means they can learn to trust that they can walk away from those unsafe situations that we want them to walk away from. They'll have confidence, and we can have confidence that they'll have the resiliency to move through those negative peer situations and disappointments. Their self-esteem is not going to be reliant on what everyone else thinks of them, because we are teaching them to trust and be okay with themselves, even if they're marching to their own drummer, even if they're not going with the crowd. And as parents, we can feel calmer ourselves because we're not moving in opposition to our kids, but we're moving in sync with them. And I can talk to that from personal experience. It happened just this week. And in all that, we can be better able to just handle what's coming next, whatever the next step is. So So from a technical perspective, there's a lot of ways that we talk about validation. Different books and speakers may call these different things, but these are the basic levels of validation. And different situations will need different levels. It's not like we just move from one to the other. Sometimes we can just validate by showing interest and being present, okay? Reflecting accurately, and we'll talk about each of these things. Reading minds, seeking to understand, acknowledging what is valid, and show equality and be real. I'm going to talk about what each of these mean. So being present means showing up and paying attention. Saying that you're paying attention and being distracted is very invalidating. Kids can see it. And denying reality, as we'll talk about, is very invalidating. Kids are like, I'm seeing this, and you're telling me it's this. And they just start to doubt their own awareness or interpretation of the world. We want to listen and give eye contact. Those nonverbal cues are really, really important. We want to match their level of enthusiasm or sadness or whatever the emotion is. We don't want to over-respond. We don't want to under-respond. We want to let them lead. Responding to those watch me as they do a cartwheel on the lawn or climb on the monkey bars, pause and giving them your full attention. That's what it means to being present. And sometimes it's just holding them when they're sad, especially when they get older and we can't fix everything, which is really hard. We want to listen, but we don't want to jump into problem solving. And we can ask them, do you want me to just listen or do you want me to offer solutions? Because sometimes kids will come home and they just want to tell you about their day or vent about something. And we want to jump in as good parents and kind of offer them solutions, and that's not what they need. And sometimes we know that's not what we need too. We come home and we tell our spouse about our day or something that happened at work. We just want them to say, oh my God, that's pretty awful. I feel bad. Wow, that must have been hard. Instead, sometimes we get, you know what you should do? And we know that that feels really invalidating because we know what we should do. We just want someone to say, yeah, that's really hard. You'll see less attention-seeking behaviors because when given good, clear attention, when requested, kids don't have to resort to bigger behaviors to let us know what they need. We teach children how to get our attention. So if tantrums are what do it, then tantrums it will be. And if a child is exhibiting high emotion, we need to be present without adding to it, which can be tricky because we're going to talk about our children's emotions and experiences can be very triggering for us. And that's why sort of checking in with our own history is important. I always think about when a child comes and they have big emotions, and we think about a pot like they're boiling water, and the water starts to boil over. And if you take like a metal spoon and you just put it in the pot, it sort of absorbs the heat and things go down. And we sort of have to be that metal spoon for them and kind of check our emotions a little bit at the door so that we don't add to the situation. We may be heartbroken or angry, but we need to just be present for them. We want to mirror their facial expressions. The nonverbal is very important. We want to be present and not be on the phone. Technology is such a big distraction for all of us. I'll hear kids say that their parents will come to their game and they'll look over and the parent's on their phone the whole time. And I acknowledge we are busy people and we have things we need to do. So if there's a call that you need to take and you're going to be on the soccer sidelines and you may have to walk off the soccer sidelines or take that call, letting them know, I'm here, I'm watching the game, I have this important call that might come in, and that will be the only reason I would take the call because it's something that's not avoidable. And if you're historically honest and true to your word and have that good, validating relationship, your kids will be, accept that. I remember when I was writing my dissertation and my youngest son played a lot of travel baseball, and if any of you have, done that, you'll know it's hours and hours sometimes, and so we would sort of make an arrangement because I'd have to sit in the car and be working because I couldn't sacrifice 6 hours sitting at a baseball field. And so I had a friend text me when he was on deck. I asked him what things he wanted to make sure that I saw, and we sort of had an agreement. And he felt validated for wanting my presence there, and I felt that I wasn't, reluctantly or begrudgingly spending all that time. So we were able to meet both of our needs. because we're not asking their permission, okay, to take a phone call or do something that we need to do. We're validating their need and desire for our presence and attention. So what is reflecting accurately? It's summarizing the facts and what you are observing, hearing. Statements like, oh no, it sounds like you had a really rough day. We want to pull the highlight points. We're not going to reflect back certainly every detail of the he said, she said story. You can say things like, I can see you're really upset right now and you just want to get in bed and just pull the covers over your head. Sounds like this, sounds like that. You can add at the end, did I get that right? Make sure that you are reflecting accurately. And in the process, acknowledging to ourselves that there's things that we cannot fix. And that can be really, really hard. You know, not making the team, not getting invited to the party. We can't repair a broken heart. So validating, reflecting accurately lets our child know that it's okay to feel as you do, that we get it and we understand. It's normal. Everyone feels that way, and it lets them move through it. And they don't have to convince us of how bad they're feeling. That's what tends to escalate behaviors for sure. We don't want to try to talk them out of it and minimize it or try to problem solve, even though sometimes the desire to do that is really, really strong. You know, in this process, because children just need that confirmation that their internal experiences are valid. It's part of learning. They're just learning about themselves. They're just learning about the world. And sometimes these are brand new feelings, like that first broken heart, or not making the team, or that big thing that they really, really wanted and it didn't work out. You know, sometimes feelings like excitement and anxiety are closely related. So some children may confuse those feelings, and us reflecting accurately what we're observing and what we're hearing from them helps them sort those things out as well. So what is reading minds? We just learned about reflecting back what was put in front of us, the story, the situation. Now we try to pick up on what is not being said by reading their facial expressions, their body language, especially in light of what you know about your child. Also, they may not have told you anything, but you see it in their face. Or they may have told you something, but they're minimizing how they're feeling about it. You see the sadness in their face, and you just ask them if they're feeling sad. Feelings are complex, and we want to help our children understand what they are feeling. Sometimes they don't know what they're feeling. This is all very new for them. There's brain wiring from the feeling centers to the language centers that are developing as they grow. Helping them understand their somatic experiences, those tummy ache kids when they are worried, all right, helping them learn about themselves and be okay with themselves. When we want to make a suggestion, we want to frame it as a guess. You know, I'm just guessing here, but I think you may be thinking that if your friend didn't text you back, they must be mad at you. Did I get that right? Or you look a little worried, you know, or you're thinking about the math test tomorrow. We don't want to assume, we don't want to tell them, oh no, this is how you're feeling. We want to invite them to think about it and share with us. So being seen, as we know, is validating. Noticing the subtle eliminates the need for a bigger display. They don't have to slam the door if you noticed their sadness maybe when they were coming in the door. And if you get it wrong, which we can easily do, we don't want to be defensive, and many emotions are overlapping. And even kids might look at us and see us distracted and think, oh, mama's mad at me. And that happens a lot. And so we want to, you know, make it okay for kids to check in with us too. And we can say, oh, yeah, I can see why you'd be thinking that, right? Validate their sort of response to you. You know what, I'm just thinking about this other thing and it has nothing to do with you, but so thank you for checking in, right? So that it goes both ways. And if you are wrong about what they're feeling, or certainly if they're wrong about what you're feeling, it gives you a chance to clarify, like I just said. And when you approach them, you want to be very open-handed. That's another DBT concept, right? Come very open-handed. So if you get it right, you can follow up with some validating the angst they're feeling or the worry or the upset. You know, things like, if I thought my friend was mad at me and if I didn't know why, I'd be upset too. That's what helps them know, okay, yeah, it's not weird to feel this way. We may not agree, and we'll talk about that, with their assumption about the situation, and there'll be time to address that. But the validating part is just acknowledging that they feel this way given their beliefs and circumstances. That is what validation is. Think about how we feel when we're on the receiving end of that kind of support. Someone just saying, yeah, I get it, this is really hard. Feeling heard without having to make a huge announcement. So seeking to understand is conveying that you understand how they're feeling, given their circumstances or previous experience. Okay, history matters. What may be very impactful for one child may not be as impactful to another because of their unique circumstances or particular experience. So for example, if a child was bit by a dog, their fear or anxiety about approaching a dog is very understandable given the circumstance, okay? So I understand you're reluctant to try out again because you didn't make the team last time, and that was really hard. It makes sense that you were extra disappointed because your birthday party was rained out 2 years in a row. Like, this makes a difference. You know, acknowledging things like, yeah, it makes sense that you don't trust I will pick you up on time because I was late the last time. And I'm sure you have kids that go, get a little worried and anxious about that. Our automatic response might be to say, oh, don't be silly, I'm always on time, or things like that, because we don't want to acknowledge that maybe we're a little late, okay? But that acknowledging that is hugely validating for kids, okay? Acknowledging our imperfections also makes us feel like we don't have to be so perfect. It's kind of very validating for ourselves. For example, I'm not very good at mailing packages. So having 5 kids go through college, they were not the kids that were getting the cookies in the mail. Just wasn't happening. I acknowledge that, and I would sort of joke about it. But I could have gotten super defensive saying, well, who needs a care package, and that's ridiculous, and all of that. But I acknowledge it's not my strong suit. I have other ones, that's just kind of not it. So when a care package was needed, enter Amazon. Go on, put something together, off it goes, okay? So we cannot do everything, and we're not perfect. And kids know that. So we're not hiding anything when we want to pretend that we're always getting it right. And acknowledging that is very freeing, okay? We're not good at everything, and that's okay. We try. The things that are really important, yeah, we're going to put our best effort in. But mailing a care package, it's okay. We can live with that. We also want to be sure to differentiate between responses that are normal and expected regardless of the history or the situation. We don't want to always fall back on the child's history when it's not really a contributing factor, because that might make them believe that they can't escape that history. A child who has a history of worry, we don't want to bring that in when they're reluctant to do something new, right? That can be invalidating, as it may inadvertently reinforce your child's identity. It may not actually line up with why they're reluctant, okay? We don't want children to assume they're never going to outgrow whatever it is that's in their history. We can acknowledge a child's worry in light of the circumstances and just let them know, yeah, most people are worried trying something new, okay? Everyone would be upset if kids are mean to them. A child's history of changing schools or, being a little quiet is not relevant. We all agree. Anyone would feel sad if someone was mean to them. And then we want to acknowledge what is valid. Feelings are always okay and accepted. Yes, your feelings are valid under the circumstances. I would feel that way if this happened. Feelings and behaviors, though, are not the same, okay? And helping kids realize that they can have feelings but not be ruled by them. Saying things like, it's okay to feel angry that your sister broke your toy. I get that entirely. But it's not okay to hit your sister. I'm not happy you responded that way. Anyone would feel that way. Anyone would be embarrassed if they slipped and fell in the mud. But saying things like, oh, nobody saw it, that's our hope, but that's really invalidating because they fell in the mud and they feel embarrassed, okay? It's important to be mindful, as I said before, not to bring in past history if it's not really a factor, because we don't want to cripple a child about their own history and want them to overcome and feel, yeah, this is normal. Most kids would be upset, embarrassed, whatever about this thing. And finally, we want to show equality and be real. We want to, if their excitement, we often fear revealing, we can relate to this, revealing our inner selves for fear of being judged. Kids are the same. Validation over time will help them feel more confident in themselves and okay with their inner experiences. When they tell us things or share things with them, we don't want to convey to them that they are weak or less than for thinking as they do or feeling like they do. Saying things like, oh, you poor thing, can really make a child who's already struggling with their own sense of competency feel even less capable. We want to match their intensity or their excitement. If their excitement's at a 5 and we're at a 10, that could be really invalidating. The art project was good, but it was not absolutely amazing, okay? This is where giving undeserved compliments comes in, or denying their self-assessment, which we're going to talk about, can be very invalidating. We don't want to treat them like they're a horrible person or an insensitive person because they shared an ugly thought. We all have them, kind of saying, oh, I wish that person didn't make the team and I made the team. These are all very normal thoughts, and we all have them. Letting us into their private world requires trust, and we want to grow that trust. And we're going to talk about how we keep safe their trust is very important. We need to acknowledge what is real. Not everyone is going to like our children. Be honest about social situations. They will not be invited to every party or make every team. And trying to put the onus of that on somebody else and blame the world is very, very invalidating, and it's really not helpful for them in the long run. You want to be able to have those real conversations, obviously to consider developmental level. You don't want to bring up things that they're not ready to hear, and don't force them to have a conversation or hear information that they express they are unready to hear. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we dismiss reality, okay? It's a fine line. When I was going through this and writing this up, I was thinking about when my dad was in the hospital for the last time, and my kids, 3 of them, lived close enough to come right away, but 2 of them were a plane right away. And I asked each of them, how much they wanted to be present for all that we knew was going to happen. And the 2 who were a plane right away made a decision. They had seen Grandpa, they knew Grandpa. It was okay to let him go if that was what we decided before they got back. And when my younger brother, who has young kids, heard me sort of having these conversations with them on the phone, he was horrified. He said, no, that's putting so much pressure on them. But that wasn't how they experienced it, because I was giving them the choice. I was validating their own thoughts about it. Each of the 5 made slightly different decisions on how they wanted to experience that, and I wasn't caught up in what was a right and what was a wrong way to handle that. Acknowledging to ourselves that we may be uncomfortable sometimes with what their choices are or what their beliefs are, and uncomfortable with certain types of conversations, tough ones like racism or economic disparity, unfairness. We don't want to try to whitewash things, but we also want to make sure that we're staying developmentally appropriate. When they come home and they tell you or us about their day, the sad or bad thing that happened, we can acknowledge the unfairness of it and the disappointment. We need to resist trying to minimize it because we don't like to see our children in pain, and it's hard, and we want to fix it, okay? So we want to be able to talk about what is real and validate them in the process. So what can we validate or invalidate? That was all a theory about how we go about doing it. We know about the different levels of validating. But let's talk about what experiences and things in our children's life we can validate. So physiological experiences, emotions and feelings, thoughts, beliefs, ideas, actions, behaviors, how they respond to things. Okay, we can invalidate them in very subtle ways and in very well-meaning ways. So when we talk about physiological experiences, we're talking about what the child physically feels. And only your child knows how they physically feel. Things like other physical things like sensory. If we have those tactile defensive kids, tags and seams could be a nightmare. Sound, smells, taste, food textures. My youngest daughter my oldest daughter rather, has always been very smell sensitive. And when she was a toddler in the mall walking by the Yankee Candle store, couldn't do that. And my mom loved the Yankee Candle store, and she'd be like, oh, we're going to the Yankee Candle. I mean, we're going to go on the other side of the mall, because it was just too much for her. And so that was validating for her. I acknowledged that, yeah, she can't handle the Yankee Candle store, and that is okay. You may run hot, so you always need a coat or socks or warm clothes on, and your child may run cold. You know, we have to remember they're going to feel things differently, and we want to validate. Sometimes they'll make the wrong decision about whether or not they need to wear a coat or need to wear warm something. And that's part of their learning process. Okay, we are not judging, we are not agreeing, we are not correcting, we are acknowledging, okay? This is how you feel. And some things we can't fix. We just need to still acknowledge and validate. And sometimes that's all it takes. Yeah, I get it. You're feeling pretty tired, it's been a long day, and we still have to, do this and that. So how do we subtly invalidate? There are situations that we obviously need to respond to, like wanting a snack after dinner is done, wanting to eat after the kitchen is cleaned up, the kid who said, I'm not hungry, I don't want dinner, and everything's put away, now they're starving. Okay, we need to respond to these things. A child who just feels pain more or worries more. A child with those sensory things, and we're trying to get out the door, and their seam on their sock is just not in the right place. A child who doesn't anticipate well, like bringing a coat, and they refuse advice, and then they're cold. So how do we inadvertently invalidate these situations? We say things like, how can you still be hungry after all that food? You don't really want that cookie, do you? Yeah, they do, really want the cookie. Their eating of the cookie may not align with their personal goal of making weight for wrestling, or it may trigger some angst in you about weight and cookies and body image and so forth. Okay, we might say things like, we can't run to the doctor with every bump and bruise for kids who seem to be, a little bit more worried about themselves than others. That kid who doesn't want to tuck in his shirt. Just tuck your shirt in, why do you have to be so difficult? All those sensory things. The child who didn't take your advice and now they're cold, saying things like, if you brought your coat like I told you, you wouldn't be cold right now, okay? But we have to acknowledge that we have to also let them learn through those experiences of making those choices. So what can we say instead? We can acknowledge how they are feeling and still hold a boundary without shaming them. Acknowledge that they're still hungry without shaming them, without saying, how could you still be hungry? That's invalidating. That makes them feel bad about themselves, question themselves, okay? You want to be able to give them a path forward. So instead, say, I get it. You're still hungry, but it takes a while for your brain and tummy to communicate, and we ate dinner kind of fast today. So, give it 15, 20 minutes, and if you're still hungry, you can have, one of the healthy snacks. It doesn't make them feel embarrassed or, different because they're still hungry, and it lets them have some good information about themselves. Kids with sensory sensitivities can feel very invalidated because it's hard for us to always understand. And these kids do feel different in this way because they are different in this way. And we need them to feel acknowledged and accepted anyway. Planning ahead, helps. If you expect a sensory impact, that's validating. Having a plan for a child to take a break who may get overwhelmed by a lot of people or a lot of noise, and sometimes we have to take pushback from family and from friends who thinks that we're coddling them or, giving into them. And we have to know that we're validating our child's needs and meeting them where they're at. Planning to let them wear a soft shirt underneath so that tucking in experience isn't quite as difficult. I remember my middle son was, kind of a little tactile defensive, and I found pants he really liked. I bought them in every size, and we just wore through all those pants because they were a winner, and I was going to take advantage of that. I shopped through touch. We just walked around touching things and found things that were good. I didn't shame him or talk about it in front of others. This was just, the way we shopped for him. And we have to be mindful, again, that not everybody is going to understand. So emotions. We all know what emotions are. And we want to be able to validate both the negative and positive emotions that our childs are experiencing. We can validate the fear or anxiety without validating the actual fear. We can validate their fear of the dark without agreeing that there is something to be afraid of in the dark, okay? They can believe there's a monster under the bed, and we can acknowledge that is scary for them, but we don't have to agree there's a monster under the bed. We can validate the anger or disappointment they feel under those circumstances. I would feel that way too. Anyone would feel that way even if you believe they're overreacting. Be excited with them. You can be validating by being present with them, listening to them, telling you about their exciting moment, letting them feel proud and having you be there with them. We can inadvertently invalidate our kids' emotions, and we are often very well-meaning, telling kids like, oh, there's nothing to worry about. Quickly trying to get kids to feel better gives them the idea that being upset or sad or angry or having any negative feeling is not okay, and our job is to get rid of it as fast as we can. So, for example, if your child is sad because he did not play well in a game, you need to validate that. You can later remind him, well, did you have fun, right? And help them to focus on that, but we can't skip the how they feel and just jump over to, well, forget that. You had fun, didn't you? And just go there. We don't want to just give them a distraction or promise them some extra screen time if they just cheer up, okay? We have to let them know that it's okay to feel that way and they will get through it. We don't want to imply that their feelings are wrong or not acceptable, saying things like, oh, no one likes a sad girl. That gives them the impression there's something wrong for them feeling that way. And think about the implications for them as they grow older. Saying things like, no one else is upset, makes them feel like really different and odd and really out of sync. Why are you making such a big deal? Okay, we're going to talk more about how we validate, but we need to also check in about how we feel about negative emotions. And that's part of reflecting on our own history and background. Does anger scare us? Does sadness in our children make us feel like a failure? Can we handle our child feeling disappointed, left out, insecure, angry with us? We need to be able to do that so we can validate them and don't try to get them out of that feeling just because we have a hard time handling it. Our affect and nonverbal says and communicates a lot. We may not be able to hide as much as we think we can, okay, especially if we're experiencing strong feelings in reaction to what they're going through. It's important especially to focus on the emotions, especially when the behavior is not valid. So the anger that your child showed when their sister broke their toy is valid, right? I'd be angry too. And that letting them know you get that. We don't want to just jump to the bad behavior and chastising them for that. Children and all of us, fear that we are different and no one else thinks like we do. So validating helps them feel normal. And I keep repeating that. And also, this may clear up another thing that they're struggling with if they're not feeling normal in how they're responding to things too. So there's a lot that we can achieve. I can see and hear how disappointed you are that you did not make the team. I know you're frustrated that you cannot have screens during the week. I know you feel like you'll never see your friends again now that you are on the travel team and you're not. These are all very validating things to tell them. Just being heard and understood can calm strong emotions. So, thoughts. And these become more of a factor as children grow older because they start to develop their own opinions, ideas, and thoughts. We want our children to have an accurate understanding of who they are, what they're good at, what is harder for them. No one is good at everything, and children do compare themselves to others. They can see who gets the hits, who scores the goals, who gets the A, and they can know that that's not them. And if we try to tell them, ignore that feeling or dismiss it or minimize it, that's very invalidating. And at the same time, we want to let them know it's okay not to be good at everything. Our children will also make choices that we would not make, like they may not want to join the travel team, things like that. We can validate their desire to want to play video games for hours at a time and still hold the boundary of no, okay? We don't want to shame them. We can't talk them out of it. And remember, they do not think of the future like we do now. So they really want that Nintendo Switch, but it may not be in the budget, or it may not align with our values. And sometimes we will try to just talk them out of that want because we feel badly maybe that we can't provide a particular thing for them. And instead, we really just need to validate their desire for it. I know everyone seems to be talking about that, but you can still, it's not in the budget for us this year, or it doesn't really align with our family values. Kids will come home, if you have girls, you've heard it, I'm so ugly, I'm so fat, okay? Don't offer to take them to the gym or get them new makeup. Don't tell them they're ridiculous for saying that. We may believe that they are ridiculous for saying that because you're looking at your child and they're beautiful, okay? But this is not how they're feeling, okay? You do not want to contradict them straight away and telling them they're beautiful. And making statements like, I love you anyway, when they fail or mess up, can give them the idea that your love is conditional. And that's not what we're trying to convey at all. They may have beliefs like, I don't like Aunt Kate. She just talks too loud and asks too many questions. Okay, they don't have to like who we like. We can acknowledge that, yeah, I get it. Okay, I know it really bothers you when Aunt Kate asks you about college and you're so done with that topic. Like, we can validate that. We know from past history that something else also may be at play here, like the college thing. This is a tough topic for them and they don't want to keep talking about it. Validation will open up the door for further discussion, so you have the opportunity to really learn maybe where they're coming from. We can validate by acknowledging who they are and conveying that they are okay, and that who they are is always okay. We don't have to condone bad behavior, and we don't have to let them go beyond the boundaries we've set. But we can acknowledge that they have different thoughts and different desires and different beliefs than we do. Their behavior may not be okay, but who they are is always okay, and that's what we want to convey. So, actions. So when I say actions, I'm not talking about sort of those bad behaviors that I was talking about before, okay? We're talking about things like their desire to be independent, to explore their own interests, and to achieve something at a level that is right for them. So wanting to do things by themselves and being stubborn to ask for help. We can watch them just, struggle through something and we want to jump in and help them. And we can invalidate them by showing impatience and disagreeing with their choice to do it on their own. What we're saying is that I don't trust you, I don't believe you're capable, you don't have any idea what you're doing, okay? But it really is, we're in a rush, we need it done, okay? But we're not getting that message across. We can validate them by acknowledging what we are seeing. It looks like you are very determined to finish that project on your own. That's validating. We can also say, I get that. However, we need to stop now because we have to do dinner, right? We have to have dinner, we have to get ready for bed, okay? We don't want to undermine them or invalidate them. Children may have interests that differ from ours, differ too from other kids, okay? We need to check in too with our own fears about our child not fitting in, not being like everyone else, and I get that's hard. When we have a boy that may be more interested in passive pursuits and all of our friends' children are active athletes and that's sort of the communities that we live in, that can be very tricky for us to work through. We also need to be okay with them messing up and making mistakes and accept that because that is part of the learning process. They may not want to excel at something or practice 3 days a week on a travel team. They may just want to do rec. They just may want to do something for fun. They may not want to compete. And by trying to talk them into that, we're really invalidating who they are. We're telling them, no, what you want for yourself is really not good enough. What I want is what's good enough. Children learn through experience. So maybe they think, I don't ever have to practice and the rec team is good enough, and then maybe in a year from now they realize, you know what? I want to do something different. Failure can be our greatest teacher, and we all know that. And rescuing and helicoptering can be very invalidating. As I said, kids learn through trial and error what works and what doesn't, and we have to let them learn without shaming them. We may have seen where this was headed, but we need to let them go the journey. And that doesn't mean we let them do unsafe things or anything like that. You know, some kids need to touch the fire to believe that it will burn them. And doing for children what they should do for themselves is invalidating. Like I said, it implies that we don't think they're capable. And now we have to consider developmental level. Not every 7-year-old is the same. Some 7-year-olds can pack their own backpack. Some don't even know where their backpack is, okay? So we have to be adjusting to them, but we need to let children do what they're capable of doing, even if it takes a little bit longer. So we may inadvertently ignore the signs of things, them being more quiet. We may not pick up on their affect. We may be afraid to sort of open a can of worms. You know, the teenager comes in very sullen. We might, I don't want to touch that, okay? But that can be invalidating because that child doesn't know. You don't want to set them off. They just think you didn't see them. You didn't notice that they were upset. We can not be present to them. They can be telling us something and we can be distracted. Okay, what ways we talked about. We want to give eye contact. We want to make attention. We can invalidate them by ignoring their choices and putting what we want on them. So we, as I said before, we want an athlete rather than an artist. Okay, we could maybe push children to please us by doing these things for us and not for them. And in that process, we unfortunately teach them to sort of suppress their own desires and to do things for others ahead of themselves. Now, we don't want to raise selfish children, okay? But there's a difference between teaching children to say, let somebody get ahead of them in line, or not race to be the first one, or grab the last cookie on the plate, okay? And teaching them that what they want doesn't matter. I work with kids that don't have opinions on so many things because they've been told their opinion their whole life, and it's a little scary to head off to college and have very few opinions about what's right for them, about what they need. Ignoring their readiness, signing them up for something they're not ready to do, pushing them too hard. Like I said, they may not be ready for that competitive team. We see the talent they have, and we want to celebrate it, but they may not be ready for that in an emotional perspective. They want to play for fun, and that's where they're at right now. Sometimes we wish our parents pushed us to do things, whether it was to go to a harder college, do better academically, push ourselves in our musical abilities. And we're determined that we don't want our kids to suffer that same fate, and we want to give them what we didn't have. It's understandable, but not validating to your child. Another thing, I hear this a lot, telling their story without prior permission. And as I said, my son gave permission for me to talk about him. He has, because I use him a lot, my middle son. You might find something very funny that they did. They may find it so embarrassing. So sitting around with your friends like, oh, I'm gonna tell them about this thing that happened. And how are they gonna say, no, Mom, in that situation? That can be really invalidating and will really cut down on trust. Sharing about your child's feelings to others. We have to share with our friends. We need to talk with our friends. We're struggling, our kid's driving us crazy. There's something going on. And unfortunately, it happens. We will talk to a friend who's the parent of our child's friend, and somehow that leaks down, and next thing you know, that child's information is getting shared with them on the playground, okay? That can be very invalidating and really hurtful to a child. So being careful about where we share information and really holding their confidences close. Jumping in to rescue them at the outcomes of their actions. Okay, that, as I said, does not mean letting them encounter something dangerous, but sometimes if they waited to the last minute and didn't, finish their homework, having to go in and face the consequences of that, that's a learning experience for sure. And we can validate the feeling. Yeah, you're a little worried your teacher's gonna be mad at you. I get that, okay? But it's bedtime, and you need sleep matters more. We can invalidate them by discouraging them from trying something you suspect they will not be good at. Your daughter wants to be the next Taylor Swift, and you're like, I don't know. But they want to take some music lessons, and if that's something you can provide for them, say, hey, give it a shot, see what you think, see if this is something for you. Or we can minimize what's important to them and magnify something else. So if they play lacrosse and they do art, we like lacrosse better, so we're gonna pay more attention to the lacrosse game and really minimize the art, which is something they're actually really passionate about. Sometimes in a bigger sense, we might blame them for maybe putting our lives on hold or not achieving the career aspirations that we had in moments of frustration, especially when we're looking for them to achieve in a way that maybe they're not. And we have to be really careful around those things, because that's invalidating to the whole child, not just for that moment, but basically it kind of says to the child, you're just not it. So we mean well as parents when we interact with our kids. Many of us are trying to do better for our children, more than we did for ourselves. We want our children to stay close to us, and sometimes we can misunderstand what that really means. And we might discourage independence and not even realize it, or that free thought, and insist on them sort of keeping the status quo. When we talked before about being real, like having those conversations, if they have a different religious view or a different political view or a different view of the world, we have to sort of fight that fear we might have around what that might mean if they're questioning things that we have taught them. We don't want to push them to do things that they, as I said, grown out of, and say things like, oh, don't be silly, you love this. Not anymore. They have different things they want, okay? We can sometimes not understand why our children have a negative emotion, okay? We're looking at their lives, we're thinking, you guys haven't made. Like, if I had all this stuff growing up, I would not have an unhappy day in my life, okay? You find it hard to believe that something so small can have them so upset, or why they're not ecstatic with all the luxuries that they have. Your child doesn't want to play with a younger sibling every time you need to be on a call, and you don't take the time to see that from their perspective. Those kinds of things. We work hard to provide for them so much, and it can be really invalidating to us to kind of experience some of their lack of gratitude at times. Their focus on the one thing that they didn't get for Christmas. We don't want to raise selfish children, and we're always sort of walking that line. So you may insist that they share even their most favorite toy in service of them not being selfish. And maybe we don't allow them to have certain boundaries around things with their siblings to keep those things that are very important to them safe and protected. That's invalidating. It gives the impression that their desires and needs are not as important as what somebody else wants. And we think about, as they grow older, we want, them to just say no. And if we're telling them they can't say no, that is very confusing, and they're not going to get the right message and have the ability to say no as they grow older. So where do we start? We got a lot of information about the things that we may or may not be doing, about how our history affects our parenting, about our responses and our reactions to things. You may be grappling with not offering solutions or correcting them in the moment. Understanding what validation is and it's not. It's not tolerating bad behavior. Taking that moment to pause and validate. It's conveying to your child that you understand how they feel and how their feeling is valid given what they believe or given the circumstances. You don't have to agree, and there will be time to clear up those misperceptions. I had this exact example this week, and my daughter was very upset with me because she misunderstood something. And when she called me and started to, tell me how hurt and upset she was, my first reaction was to correct the record, because that isn't what I said. That was not the facts of the information. And here I am writing this whole thing on validation all week, so I really had this in the forefront of my mind. I had to take a deep breath and say to her, you know what? If I believed that I wasn't showing up for you for this very insignificant reason, I'd be really hurt too. And that you could just feel on the phone took the energy down. It felt it in me too, that I was able to just not feel so defensive. I was able then to clarify that she missed a significant part of that story because she wasn't paying attention, and we were able to sort of work through it. And it's those moments that build the trust and build the relationship. So she knows that she can come to me and say, Mom, you really hurt my feelings, or I'm really upset with you because, and know that I'm not going to try to talk her out of it. I'm not going to be defensive. The tendency is there. It's right there at the surface, and I so wanted to do it, and I had to catch myself, okay? We may feel like bad parents, and that interferes with us just trying to do this. It may just feel very overwhelming. We want to reflect on our own history of how we were parented. Is there any trauma in our backgrounds? Were we allowed to share our feelings, or were we dismissed? Are we trying to live vicariously through our kids? We didn't get to do certain things, so we're going to be darn sure that our kids get to do them. And that's wonderful, unless that's not what they want. Sometimes it's hard for us to manage our own emotional responses. And if we have a child who can be emotionally reactive, we may also be emotionally reactive. And so we need to acknowledge that and be aware of that and take care of ourselves in that way. Some feelings or behaviors may be very triggering for us. We may not handle being talked back to. That just may really set us off. And instead of taking the time to acknowledge the feelings underneath or what your child's trying to convey, we may go right to, do not talk back to me, that kind of a thing. So we have to take a moment, say, what is being conveyed here? We can go back and address the way it was done, okay? And the more we show our children that we will validate and meet them where they're at, the more they're going to be comfortable coming to us in a more appropriate way. It's not going to happen when they've just boiled over and they just can't hold it in anymore, because that's when you're going to get the big, I hate you and you nevers will show up. We have to let go, as I said before, of being perfect. There's no such thing as being a perfect parent. Acknowledge what we're good at, what our strengths are, and go from there. And when we do mess up, because we will, it's about making those relational repairs. You know, we may recognize that we were invalidating, that we just jumped in and offered a solution when that was not what was being requested, or we just told them not to worry about it when we really should have sat with them and heard about their worry. And it's really a great model to come back and say, you know what? I realize now I wasn't fully attending to what you were saying. Let's go back. I can see you're really worried about this. It seems like this is a big deal for you and I didn't pick that up. And that is going to be very affirming. Sometimes those opportunities are actually better than just getting it right the first time. We want to be able to find joy in parenting because we get so busy and caught up with schedules and homework and carpools. Kids will tell me, like, there is no time. Like, they come home, they have a snack, they got to do homework, they go to practice, and they come home and they have dinner and they have bed, and there's very little time to connect and share about their day. So they're holding on to a lot of things, and we're busy trying to get the logistics done. We may not pick up on that sad face. When they sort of lay down and say, I don't want to go, you know, our initial reaction is like, you're going, and just, you know, get your shoes on. And it's difficult because we don't want them to be late. We have to get somebody else there, and we're always trying to juggle these things. So we have to be kind to ourselves, knowing that, okay, we have a problem here, and we need to pause and take care of it. And sometimes just pausing and validating, yeah, you were having a lot of fun playing, you know, on your video game, and you don't want to stop to go, you know, with me because we have to go pick up your brother at his activity. From all of this, it's choosing something that you want to work on. So whether it's just being more present when they're talking to you, making eye contact, reflecting back, just taking that moment to take a deep breath and think about, okay, where should I go here? I just had a really big reaction. Sometimes we'll observe two siblings and who typically are, you know, okay with each other, normal stuff, and then you hear one sibling say something really awful or out of the box. And our initial response is going to be to come right down on them with a sledgehammer because that was really rude. And we need to address the comment, but we want to say, hang on, you know, where's that coming from? You know, I know you really don't think that way about your sister. You know, what brought that about? And, you know, are you upset about maybe they got some award that you didn't get, or they came home with a better report card than you got, or they made their team and you didn't make your team? All the things that can go on. And while your child feels like they want to be happy for their sibling, and they are at one level, they're human, and they're kind of feeling maybe jealous or a little bit less than. And we don't want to, as I said earlier, make them feel bad about that, because we've all felt that way. You know, we want to say, yeah, I get it. It's really hard when somebody gets something you want too, and you're happy for them because you're glad they got it, but you also want to have it. And just hearing that can be very validating. It doesn't mean that they're going to wish ill on their sister, okay? It's actually just letting them accept where things are. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable to skip over the part where they say something you know to be an exaggeration or not true. Like, you never do this for me. You always do that for them. And we don't want to jump in and sort of get into that argument. And I often say, we do not have to attend every argument we're invited to. We can step back and take it in a different direction and try to get underneath what it is that they're telling you. You know, parents, when I talk about this, can often misunderstand what validation is. And again, it's not allowing your children to get away with bad behavior. And that, you know, inappropriate tone, that, you know, hitting their sister, that other rule violation, there's time to address that. And our children will be more open to hearing us when they know the message they were trying to convey was received. I'm upset with my sister because she keeps taking my things, okay? I'm upset because I'm always picked last, and my brother always gets picked first. It doesn't mean we're condoning it if we're not correcting it right away. You know, we all have our own ideas and ideals about parenting. I mean, I always laugh when I had visions of my firstborn, that I would just lovingly gaze in on a crib with her, and that she would be and that never happened. She was a terrible sleeper, and there was no gazing in that crib. It was like, get away as fast as you can. Sometimes we have this idea that we're going to have this socialite or this very social party type of child because that's kind of what we wanted or so forth, and our child is, more introverted or more quiet. And trying to push them in a way that doesn't line up for them can feel invalidating. But actually accepting and stepping into who they are can feel really good if we let us do that. We don't want to deny the independence that's burgeoning for them as they grow older. We have to sort of evaluate what we allow them to do. The boundary that we held around certain things when they were 7 may be different at 10. I'm a big advocate of the Let It Grow, if you're familiar with that, and they talk about letting children build their self-confidence from doing things, walking into the grocery store and making a purchase on their own, things of that nature. That validates them as being competent and capable. If we, for all the good reasons we have, wanting to keep them safe, not wanting to let anything bad happen to them, don't allow that. The message that we're giving them is that they're not able, and they're going to continue to doubt their capabilities as they grow older. Well, I went quicker maybe than I thought I was going to, but thank you very much for listening. And any questions on what I just rattled through?
What we're going to do with questions is we're going to walk around with the mic so everything gets picked up on the video.
Hi, thank you so much. It was a great presentation. I just have a question about, do you have thoughts or guidelines for parents about what they post online about their children and how that can affect validation or how the child experiences validation?
That's a really good question. And I had a family that the dad would post these videos of them when they were younger, and they were on sort of like a public YouTube channel. And the daughter, she was in middle school, and these were getting found now. And and the family had family overseas, so it was just sort of like a sharing opportunity, and the child was really upset, and dad wasn't getting it, wasn't taking them down. So checking in with your child about that, about what to post. And when they're, some kids don't, if they're old enough and they have their own social media, like tagging them, they may not want to be tagged, making sure that the picture is okay. When I post things of especially my girls, I'll is this a good picture? Do you approve of this picture? And they will let me know. So it really is about checking in with them, but that's a really good thing. And if you're mindful of it and ask them, I want to post this online, I want to share this, and some kids will be fine with it. Other kids will be a little uncomfortable. And sometimes then that brings about a conversation as to why. Maybe they don't want to draw attention to themselves and worry about that in maybe a way that's a little bit not so healthy. So it's really about checking in with them, but that's a really good question.
I have a question about perfectionism. A child who maybe was sensory defensive, and as they're getting older, especially on the computer, something that should just take a few minutes, they're taking so long to make the margin, just invalidating, you want it to look right. But as, it's just taking, and at some point, I don't know at what point do I say, now it's time for dinner, but it's not an easy as you say, then they're okay, time for dinner. It's they can't let it go. Mm-hmm. So at what point does that validation, I end up invalidating, this was only supposed to take a few minutes, how you sort of handle that?
Acknowledging certainly that they want it to look perfect, and I'd be curious as to what their fear is if it's not perfect, and sort of, having that conversation. And sometimes those things are addressed well sort of offline when that thing is not going on. And, I love the word notice. I noticed that when you're working on certain types of things that you really, really put a lot of effort into getting it just right. And I see that you really want it to be perfect. And I'm just wondering, what if what would happen if it wasn't perfect? What if you just did it, and then it was less than perfect and you turned it in? And having that conversation, because what their fear and worry is may be part of that. They may think they're going to get in trouble. They may think the teacher's going to get mad. They may think they're going to get made fun of. Some kids are very rigid, and it's either perfect or it's not at all. And sometimes it's a really hard time working through that, because we may have kids with some neurodivergence who are just very black and white thinkers. So there's going to be some pre-planning that will go into that, and addressing that. Like, I know that you want to make this perfect, and I want to support you. So we're going to maybe do it over a couple of days so that you can spend the time you need, but we still can have dinner and bath and bed on time. So it's, kind of offline sometimes, agreeing to that. But in the moment, and they're just stuck on wanting to do it, you can just say, I know you want it perfect, and we still need to go have dinner. And so we're gonna go have dinner, because that you need food. Maybe when you come back and work on it later, you'll be, feeling more energized to do it. That's a possibility. You don't want to say nobody else is taking this long. Like, that would be the invalidating thing. Even though it's like in the back of our head, we can just validate that they want to do it, and we need to go eat dinner, if that makes sense.
Hi. I have 3 daughters, different ages and stages, different levels of athleticism, different levels of puberty and where they are. I guess I'd like to ask, if they come home and say I'm fat, right? And the first instinct I have is, of course, do what you say is invalidate them by saying, no, you're not, right? You're perfect, you're beautiful. So how do you validate them saying that they're fat, or,
You can say, I know that you feel that way right now. I see it differently. I see you looking beautiful, but I get it that you don't feel that way right now. And that's the validating part. You're not confirming that they're ugly. You're acknowledging that you don't see them as fat or whatever, but you are validating, yeah, I know that this is how you're feeling right now. And there may be a larger story around that, they went shopping and everybody else was a size 2 and they were not a size 2, or whatever the case is, and opening up, that conversation, saying, do you want to talk about what's, has you feeling and believing this, believing that you're fat, and seeing if they'll open up around that. But you can acknowledge how they feel and still not agree with it. Yeah.
so different.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It is really hard. And sometimes we project onto them too, unknowingly, if we were, say, a heavy teenager and we don't want them to be a heavy teenager, so we may be, making comments around not eating cookies or being food restrictive, or look at them and, and we don't mean to do that as well. But you can acknowledge how they're feeling, because that's how they're feeling. Yeah, I get it. You're feeling fat. You're feeling like everybody else can fit into a size 0 and you're the only one. Like, as much as you can bring in terms of your understanding of what their experience is will help them feel validated. It's not going to solve it. They're not going to suddenly, oh, I'm not fat, but they are going to feel heard, because we can't fix everything, and especially as they become teenagers. And that's really, really hard for us as parents, because we don't want our kids to feel bad.
Okay, I'm going to try to talk low, because I tend to talk loud even without a microphone. I probably don't even need the microphone. I traveled here from Ridgefield, and I am a parent of, my child's much older. She's technically an adult now. She's 18. She's neurodiverse. And I will say, from all the things I'm hearing from parenting, so much of this still applies to me in my situation. But, to be frank, having my child grow up in Fairfield County, she's different anyway. She thinks she's fat. She's all of a medium. She worries about what other kids are thinking of her, but I give her so much credit, and this is more of a comment. She just gets out there and does what she has to do. I don't know how she does it, because I didn't grow up like that. I was always grow up like, oh, what are the other people going to think? And we're really trying not to raise her like that and to be her own person. And I would just tell people of younger kids, however your kid is, just stay the course with them. It's really hard to kind of do your own path. She tells me that she doesn't want things on social media without her approval. And, you know, as a parent, over the last several years, I've had to respect that because I see so many people putting their kids online. You know, they win this award, they win that award, and everybody's like, oh, this is so great. I'm like, oh, my child doesn't even want to be online, and nobody's telling her she's great. I would just say, however your kid is, just stay the course with them. They are who they're meant to be. So, thank you. I try not to cry.
No,
So,
thank you for
anyway.
that. And you know, raising children who march to their own drummer for whatever reason is really hard. My oldest was a march to her own drummer type of girl. And she had some real success recently. And she said, high school drama resolved, you know? So it took a long time. She's going to be 34. And, you know, it was sort of like a joking, offhanded thing, right? But being a teenage girl around here and just not being this, you know, interested or doing the same things as everybody else can be really, really hard. But you're right, staying the course with them, validating them, celebrating them, and noticing. You say, you know what, I see how hard you work. I see all that effort you put in. We can take that time to notice. We can validate them even without them showing up looking like they need it, because, I mean, that would feel great for us if someone said, I see how hard you work. I see all the effort you put in. And I just have to tell you, I'm just really proud of you. And that can feel really validating.
So not unlike you, mine is a little more like a comment. As I'm listening to you, Terry, I'm thinking all of us in this room, well, many of us in this room, we weren't raised hearing our parents speak in this way. So we're in this moment of balancing learning and teaching, which is maybe a little harder than, oh, I remember how my mom did it, or my teachers did it. Maybe our teachers were good at this, but those tended to be the only roles that were great at that. So it's hard to be doing both sides of the coin at the same time with our cohort of children, which is maybe a bit trickier. And then the other thought that I have is I'm trying to resolve in my mind the duality of my children not wanting long talks, and that some of this act of validating involves conversation back and forth with the child. So I'm trying to figure out as I go forward from this how to be efficient with my validating, so I'm not asking them for too much of their time while they get into learning and listening to that it's a safe conversation.
And some of the validating statements that I kind of shared are those kind of quick, straightforward, for exactly that reason, because there are some kids who can't hang in for a lot, and we just want to plant that seed. I get you. I can see you're upset. That is really hard, to fill in the blank, whatever that is, and just stop. We as women, we tend to want to talk some more, and we have to almost like button the lip and not do that. I forgot what else there was something else I wanted to respond to. That was, yeah. And that's why I talked a lot about reflecting on our own history, because you're absolutely right. We know how to make moms like strawberry shortcake, and we know how to host a dinner party because we saw that growing up. But we might not have seen this because it was not part of the culture. There was a lot of children should be seen and not heard. We had to obey and do what we were told to do. And our parents may have been for the mind, hey, it worked for me, it'll work for you. And we have different cultures coming in, all of those kinds of things. So that's why I did emphasize a lot on reflecting on ourselves and being kind to ourselves, because you're right, we maybe didn't get this. And my oldest had a very different experience of me than my youngest. And I can say that, because I learned. I mean, you come in with your first child, you don't know anything. Like, you're just kind of winging it, and you're doing what you were done to you. And I remember the moments of thinking, okay, I'm going to do it differently, because I had a child who was very different from me. I mean, very different from me. And so by the time my youngest came along, and my oldest will say that, you got a better version of mom, you know what I mean? And I can say, yeah, I know, I figured it out. Thank you for being my learning thing. But I have 5 kids to get it right. Sometimes if you only have 2, you're kind of doing it all, figuring it out all at the same time, and it can be really, really tricky.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. It's given me a lot to think about. I have teenagers, And one section you had about reading minds and asking questions to open up the conversation. What I struggle with is a stay-at-home mom, and I like to be home when they get home from school so that I can open up those conversations. And a lot of times, what I find is if they had a bad day, which is often, if I ask the question, I get kind of a short fine, or like I can tell he doesn't want to talk about it. But then like 2 minutes later, he explodes about something, and I know it's related to how he's feeling, and I become a punching bag. And then other times the risk is maybe like I shouldn't ask the question because maybe he just wants to come home and decompress. And by asking the question, I'm triggering things. So it's a really hard balance I'm finding. And also me personally, we have a very tight schedule, like most people, and I kind of want to talk about things now because I know what the rest of the afternoon looks like, and there's not going to be time to talk about it. So anyway, I'm just curious.
And then having those offline conversations and saying, I notice, like, I'm grappling. And you could, that's not like, I want to hear about your day. I also don't want to, invade your process of decompressing when you get home. And, how can we manage that? I want to hear about your day. I want to be there for you. I want, whatever it is. But I also don't want to, initiate a conversation at a time when it doesn't feel, good for you, right? So you can have sort of those offline conversations. Other things, too, I will talk with parents about having space in the house where there's no conversations about grades and school things and all those tough conversations. Because parents will say, well, they come in, they go right up to their room. And kids will say to me, yeah, because as soon as I show up in their presence, they're asking me, what'd you get on the math test? What do you have for homework today? Did you finish those college apps? And they're like, I don't want to hear it because I've been all day getting told what to do. So kind of literally establishing Switzerland somewhere, in the kitchen, for example, that those conversations don't happen. It's connecting conversations. So they can feel safe coming into the kitchen. And you can tell them, if I bring up something that is off limits, you can remind me, Mom, remember, you weren't going to ask me about, oh, right, okay, yeah, we're just going to talk about the weather, whatever it is, and let that kind of unfold. Boys are often better talkers in the car or better talkers when they're doing something. Dads can sometimes go outside and shoot some hoops and the conversation may start to flow. Maybe that's not what we do, but sometimes we can just get them involved in something with us, and the conversation can start from that, activity, because sometimes for boys just being moving in some way kind of brings things out.
The other thing about that is that so many of our kids hold it together all day in school. It takes so much for them to hold it together that the last thing they want is, being quizzed or even just having to talk about what happened when they get home.
Yeah, so we want to be the safe place where they can just come and they are going to let it all out because they are holding it together all at school. We don't want to be a punching bag, for sure, and we can have that offline conversation, if there's anything that's really scary or impactful in some way, but also, knowing that we can't fix everything and sometimes they just need to vent about what happened, and it's hard for us to hear.
Do you have advice on when your child's having kind of a big emotion moment and when the right time to use validation? Because I feel like I know that there's certain triggers for my daughter, and it's like every time she gets big emotions over this one subject's homework, and I try some validation techniques, but it doesn't seem to work. So I then eventually end up saying, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? And that's the problem solving, because I don't see anything de-escalating from the big emotions. When I'm trying to be empathetic and listen, she just she's crazy. Like, she's almost irrational. And I just, I don't know if I should wait until she calms down to then start the validation, because I feel like it's not working, and I feel like she then starts using me like a punching bag. Like she's like, "You're making it worse." It's like, "It's all your fault." All this stuff, and then you feel like you're not doing anything right,
Right,
and
yeah.
then I get emotional, and it just,
Well, I
it's
mean-
like we repeat it every time she has this subject. I know it's going to be a difficult afternoon.
We want to make sure that there's no learning issue or something related to why they're having trouble with that subject. So if it's writing, if it's math, we want to really step back and say, is their reaction to this, valid given the circumstances of their learning challenge or difference? And-
Actually, viola.
Okay, viola.
So I don't know if there's any.
And maybe the viola is not their interest, and that, that is, and having a conversation around that is, and that's tricky because may see their talent. How many of us have kids who have instruments, we pay for lessons, and they never practice, and it becomes a war. So, kind of saying, what I notice that when it's time for viola practice, you really melt down. Like, what, do we, is viola something that you want to do? Is that something you want to continue? And maybe they say, yes, they do, and say, okay, I'm glad, then let's figure out how to work this through. So if, that's a great example of one of those interests or choices that they may differ from what it is that we want. And she may have trouble tolerating not getting it right the first time. And instruments are hard, and you can validate that too. And again, in the offline time when they are calm, because you're right, in the moment, we can validate. Yeah, I know this is really hard for you, and you struggle when you don't get it right the first time, and when you make a mistake, and that is validating. But it may not be something that necessarily she has to do right now. That could be another way to go about it too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
More questions? Thank you.
Well, thank you very
Thank you,
much for
Terry.
all your great questions.
I just want to make sure everybody knows that please sign in. We will be sending out a copy of the video from today as well as the slides. I saw a lot of people taking photos of the slides, so you'll be able to have them actually as well. Thank you so much for coming.